Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Luis Fernandez. It's been over a year since UNC hired Bill Belichick as its head coach. We just wrapped up a whole documentary talking about the experience, so now let's put a bow on this conversation. Joining me now is WRAL Sports investigative reporter Brian Murphy. Brian, year one is in the books. We're on to year two. What should we expect for Bill Belichick year two?
I think that's the big question that remains. You know, we've spent a lot of time dissecting how he got hired and what has happened in year one, the hype leading up to the opener against TCU, all the off-the-field stuff, kind of the way the season was a disappointment. And now it's kind of like, okay, well, we've moved past all that. Now what? And, you know, Bill Belichick and company have brought in 39 new players for next season. We'll see what the transfer portal brings when it opens on January 2nd. We can look at the schedule, which is a lot tougher than the schedule they played this year. There's just so much, I think, uncertainty about how this is going to play out. You've got a coach that is arguably the greatest coach of all time. Now he's trying to do that, implement his program in college. He's confident. He says, this program has worked everywhere I've been. But college is a lot different than the NFL, and time, I think, is already running out on Bill Belichick.
So just for perspective here, we're recording this on December 18th. A lot can happen, right? This time about last week, we had offensive coordinator Freddie Kitchens be like, there was some change on the coaching staff there. So, that's going to be part of the question here in all of this. Let's kind of break this down bit by bit from the program as a whole. We'll start with the coaching staff. What kind of changes, additional changes you think we could expect here? How is that just going to be, just in looking in general, going into next year?
Yeah, well, we've seen, offensive coordinator Freddie Kitchens was fired. The special teams coordinator Mike Priefer was fired as well. And that's two openings on your staff. You can reconfigure things a lot of different ways. I think offensive coordinator is probably the most important job on a staff. Belichick has all of his bones on defense. I mean, he was one of the greatest defensive coordinators of all time in the NFL. The defense actually played fairly well this year. I wouldn't say it was great, but it played well enough to win more games than they won. The real problem was on offense. And in college football now, you're seeing a lot of times when you make an offensive coordinator change, that offensive coordinator brings a quarterback that's familiar with the system. So are they looking at a situation like that where they add an established offensive coordinator who has a quarterback who's been in their system for 1 or 2 years, and they come as a package deal? Do you look at guys who sort of what I would call the old guard, a guy like Bobby Petrino or Chip Kelly, guys who've had NFL experience, had college experience, have been known to put up huge numbers offensively, but maybe a little past their prime and maybe, phasing out of their career? Or do you go with a young hotshot guy who's had success, maybe at a lower level? Or do you have to find someone who's worked with Belichick? Like, there's so many elements to this in that, so it's really difficult to see what direction they're going to go in. But I think it's a critical hire for this program moving forward.
So often in Belichick's, NFL career, right, when there were changes with coaching staff, it was often like you're seeing very similar people coming in and out. Josh McDaniels, I think, was the prime example, someone who was his offensive coordinator, then left, then was his offensive coordinator, then left, and, all of that kind of going on.
Well, you remember at one point he put Matt Patricia, who had been his defensive coordinator and then had gotten a job with the Lions, and he lost that job with the Lions, came back. They didn't have a real role for him, so they made him the offensive coordinator, and he had never done that before. In a lot of ways, Belichick values that familiarity maybe more than the expertise in that particular area. I think he figures, let me get the guys I want around me, and we can figure out who does what.
So it will definitely be interesting to see what kind of path he follows with that in mind. Looking at the roster itself, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of this, because there are a lot of changes. Some of it's just a math perspective, right? You have to, if you lose a certain amount of players, you need to bring a certain amount of players in. If you bring in some players, that means some people have to go. They leaned so heavily into the transfer portal last year. There were so many just new faces. What should the roster kind of changeover look like this year?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too much into math here, but you're only allowed 105 guys on your roster, give or take 1 or 2 walk-ons that have been grandfathered in. But under the House settlement and the new rules, you only allowed 105 on your roster. Carolina brought in 40 new guys, 39 freshmen and JUCO transfers at the early signing period in early December. So they ended the year at 101, so you've got to clear out 35 guys from your roster, and they don't have 35 guys who are out of eligibility. So that means a lot of guys are going to get in the portal from last year's team, and we've already seen that. A guy like Tyler Thompson, who had a really good year, is in the portal. Davion Goss, a running back, is in the portal. Max Johnson, their backup quarterback, is in the portal. And I think you're going to see a lot more because they still haven't gotten to the number that would allow them to add all these players to their roster. Now, anybody you want to get out of the portal, anybody you want to add to your team is going to have to be almost a one-for-one with somebody leaving your team, because it's not like you have a lot of extra room once you get rid of enough guys to bring in the 40. So anyone extra is going to – so there was a lot of talk last year. 70 new guys, a long time. That's a lot of new guys. It's hard to build a team when you have so many new guys. We might be looking at 70 new guys again for the North Carolina roster. And how does that work? Like who does stay? Does Gio Lopez, the quarterback, stay? Does Melkart, the defensive end who had a terrific season, stay? We've already seen their leading tackler, Kamari House, is in the portal. I mentioned Tyler Thompson, Davion Goss, who was kind of their third down back. I mean, they're starting to lose important pieces off of last year's team, which, let's remember, finished 4-8. How many more of those pieces do they lose, and who do they replace them with? It's a math problem, but then it also becomes a talent problem, because as good as these freshman class may be, there were no 5-stars in there. There were a couple 4-stars, but freshmen are called freshmen for a reason, right? How many of those 38, 39 guys are going to be able to contribute to a winning football program in 2026?
And that's a point I actually kind of want to get into a little bit here, because first off, in terms of the overall change, that might just be the world of college football now that we're dealing with. But one of the things that's continued to be touted by Michael Lombardi, by just UNC in general, is they have this huge group of a relatively high-ranked freshman class coming in. With Bill Belichick, it feels like some of the expectations are and were more of a quicker turnaround. So how do you kind of compute those two things, a large freshman class versus trying to get more immediate or sooner action into actual wins?
Yeah, Belichick's contract is 5 years, but those first 3 are the only guaranteed years. And so you're kind of working on a 3-year plan here, and the first year didn't go according to plan by anybody's definition of what the plan is. Whether expectations were too high or not, nobody expected 4-8. Now you decide we're going to rebuild with freshmen. Well, that takes 2 or 3 years, and Belichick is 73. I mean, it's just a fact that has to be part of this conversation. How long does he want to do this? How long is he capable of doing it? How long is he going to get to do it? Well, when you bring in all these freshmen, you're sort of guaranteeing yourselves a multi-year process. And if you want to add people out of the transfer portal, usually the best teams are able to add pieces out of the transfer portal that supplement what you all have already built. And I think that is the plan for this program. The problem is what they've already built is 2 or 3 years away. And so it's just a lot. You're just asking a lot. When you look at the schedule, it's much, much tougher next year. They might only be favored in 2 or 3 games next year. And so you just look at it and you say, I can sort of see what they're trying to do, but do they have enough time to do that? And if the other question, though, is if you don't do it that way, how else are you going to do it? Because the other way to do it is to go buy everybody in the transfer portal. That doesn't really work. Carolina doesn't really have that kind of money to pull a Texas Tech where you just build a $47 million roster and a $7 million defensive line and you try to go win the Big 12, which they did. Virginia was able to make the ACC championship game. They got an anonymous $20 million donation that helped them build their roster on top of all the other money they have for revenue sharing and whatnot. If someone out there wants to give UNC that kind of money, maybe they build a team like that, but they seem committed to building a team through this freshman class that Bill Belichick called the foundation. It's going to take 2 or 3 years for that foundation to be ready.
Let's go ahead and take a quick break there. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Luis Fernandez. We're joined by WRAL Sports investigative reporter Brian Murphy. Brian, you mentioned a little bit talking about the guaranteed time frame there versus the whole length of the contract. And as we know, football, really all sports, but football in general, college football, sometimes there's just not a lot of patience for coaches to take time to grow, to develop, to create these programs. What kind of patience do you think there is for Bill Belichick as a whole as he gets ready to enter year 2?
This to me is the most pressing question moving forward. Season 1, even though on the field did not work out the way they wanted, could be classified as a success. They sold out all their season tickets earlier than ever. They got so much attention from ESPN. They were on prime time on Labor Day night. Donations were up. Sponsorships were up. The money coming into the program, way up. But you look at those crowds late in the season, they look like Mac Brown era crowds and sometimes worse. How many of those people are back for year two? Like all the buzz you got in year one that contributed to the bottom line, how much of that is going to be back in year two? Is ESPN going to want to show all your games? Are the season ticket holders going to be willing to pony up for another season of this? So there's that question. And I think that question may end up answering the other question, which is how much patience do they have for Bill Belichick? It's one thing if you're selling out every game and there's a buzz and everyone's talking about you and you lose games, okay, we can live with that. But if there's no buzz and you're not selling out every game and no one's talking about you and you're still losing games, well, now that's a real problem. I do think the fans will come back if they win, but now it's the equation's kind of flipped. Before, the fans were showing up before you had won a game. Now I think you're going to have to win games to get those fans to show up. And again, I hate to keep mentioning the schedule, but it's a very difficult schedule. I've seen no influx of talent yet, whether at the quarterback position or other skill positions, or now you're losing some guys off your defense. Like, it's hard to see how that team is going to have a ton of success. And so if you have bad crowds, don't sell a ton of tickets, aren't getting attention, then the Belichick experiment kind of falls apart. All the things you wanted to get out of it start to hurt a little bit. One other thing I would mention, all the assistant coaches signed 2-year contracts. After next season, they would not be under contract anymore. After next season, you would only owe Belichick one guaranteed year of $10 million a year. You'd owe Lombardi. He's on a 3-year contract. But the cost to get out of this whole thing drops by a lot at the end of next season. And so I think 2026 is vitally important.
Who are some of the folks that you need to keep in mind just with UNC Power in general that, you know, are critical to Bill Belichick staying at UNC long term?
Yeah, one guy who's gotten a ton of attention is John Pryor. He's the former chairman of the Board of Trustees. He's currently on the Board of Trustees. He's kind of made a legacy play in some ways by helping spearhead this. But the name I think you really have to pay attention to is Lee Roberts. I mean, he's the chancellor, and even though he was the interim chancellor starting in January of 2024, he was only made the permanent chancellor in August of 2024. 4 months later, he makes this decision to hire Bill Belichick. A lot of political capital, maybe against the wishes of the athletic director, who's, Bubba Cunningham, a longtime athletic director, seemed like he was going to go for a younger coach kind of on the way up, maybe save a lot of money doing that. But Lee Roberts has been steadfast. Every time I've talked to him, and I talk to him probably once a month at some public venue, every time I ask him about Bill Belichick and every time he gives some version of we're 100% committed to this, we believe football is going to pay the bills for everything else going on in athletics. I mean, that's the subtext to a lot of this. Ballooning costs at the athletic department, not just at North Carolina, but across the country. You need football to help pay those bills, which is why you're willing to take a big swing on Bill Belichick. But in many ways, Lee Roberts, this was one of his first giant decisions, public decisions, and I think he's all in on this. So in order to get rid of Bill Belichick, you have to have people who in power decide I'm going to have to go out there and publicly say I made a mistake. I was the person who signed off on this hire. I was the person who made this hire happen. And 2 years in or 3 years in, I have to concede defeat on a major decision. And I mean, I talk to a lot of people, powerful people, and a lot of times, sometimes they don't want to make that. They don't want to admit publicly that they got a big, huge decision wrong. And so I think in some ways, I don't know that Lee Roberts would get fired over this, but it may tarnish his star a little bit if you have to pull the plug a year and a half, 2 years into the Bill Belichick experiment.
Last question here, because, we're recording this in December, and they don't play another football game for several months now, one which will be in Ireland, of all places, against TCU, a team that has, crushed them to begin the previous season. Is there anything that could happen over the course of the next few months that would make you think maybe things are moving in a better direction with UNC football?
There's a couple things. I thought you were going to ask a different question.
I thought you were thinking that.
Is there anything that could go wrong? And I think there are a lot of things that could go wrong.
Sure.
Wrong depending on your perspective. One, there's going to be an NFL coaching cycle that's going to happen. NFL coaches are being fired, but they don't typically get hired until January, February. I do think Belichick, even though he's publicly said, I'm not interested, I think his name is going to come up. Whether it comes up in a real way or not a real way, just something to monitor. The fact that there is not a game for all that time, I think leads to a lot of attention on the other stuff. We haven't mentioned Jordan Hudson's name yet, but every time she does something, it's going to get picked up, and there's not football to distract from whatever it is that Jordan Hudson is doing. And this story gets national scrutiny. Like there lots of people are talking about this.
Yes, it gets clicks. People pay attention. People like to read about it, to watch about it.
So as to your question of what could get better, I think, who do they hire as offensive coordinator? Who do they get as their quarterback? I don't think you can go into the season with Gio Lopez as your unquestioned, unrivaled starting quarterback. You're going to have to bring in at least some competition for that job. That would be a sign. If you can land an offense coordinator who he doesn't even have to be highly touted. I just think a competent offense coordinator who does a good job. Can you land a quarterback who can pressure Gio or win the job and do a good job? What happens in the portal? Like, do you just end up losing all the guys who were productive? A guy like Jordan Shipp, who said he wants to come back to Carolina. Does he get an offer from an Ohio State or an SEC school that's too good to pass up and says, you know what, I don't know what our quarterback situation's like. I'm trying to get to the NFL. I got to go a place where I can be a number one receiver and put up numbers. Like, there's a lot of that stuff. Can you hold on to the talent you have? Can you add to it? And can you bring in an OC and a quarterback that's going to get fans excited? That being said, 9 months is a long time. Like, I think there are more pitfalls than there are ways for this team to improve. And with Bill Belichick, everything is going to get scrutinized. The Jordan Hudson aspect of it, who he hires, whether he comes up in these NFL talks, like, just everything is magnified. He's going to probably get in the Hall of Fame.
Right. In the middle of the summer.
He's a finalist for the Pro Football Hall of Fame. That decision usually comes out right around the Super Bowl. And then he will be, he's a near certainty to get in, unless I guess he takes an NFL job. That would be in August. He would be inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in August and get ready to start his second season at UNC. Like, that's not a bad thing. In fact, that's a really good thing.
Right.
But it's just like, holy cow. Like, have we ever had this? A college coach getting inducted in the Pro Football Hall of Fame right before he starts coaching again for his team. Everything with Bill Belichick is kind of unprecedented.
I think we saw from mid-December of 2024 until the kickoff against TCU, there was a whole lot of conversation. There was a whole lot of stories. Brian, something tells me this year is probably not going to be any different. That is WRAL Sports investigative reporter Brian Murphy. Brian, thank you so much. I'm Luis Fernandez. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.